Hi, and welcome back to Pulso Demográfico. This is a series which is exploring some of the biggest issues facing our world through a demographic lens, from population aging to why people are not having the number of children they'd like to have. And today we're tackling a really crucial issue, and that is data and artificial intelligence. The topic really is deeply committed or deeply connected to demography because AI is fundamentally changing how we study and how we live within our populations. It's both a new tool for demographers, but it's also a powerful force shaping the very social structures that demographers are studying. So now I'd like to ask a really important question. Can we trust data in a world of AI? Joining us today is the incredible Dr. Andrea Jones Roy. She is a political scientist turned data scientist who believes that curiosity, imagination, and creativity are our most powerful tools. She's the host of a podcast called Behind the Data, and she's passionate about making the power of data accessible to everyone. Andrea, it's so nice to have you with us today. Thanks for joining us from New York. Let me start with the big picture. How will AI change the way we study human populations? What new insights can you give us about demographic and social trends and how communities are changing?
I mean, it's great to be here, and indeed, I am beaming in from New York City, where we certainly have no shortage of our own demographic challenges that probably are similar to other major cities. But it's a huge question, and you hit on some of the key themes that I think about in your opening remarks, which is it's both a way that we can. It's a new set of lenses and tools for us. Think of like getting the Large Hadron Collider or a really powerful telescope, or really combine those two things. It's a brand new tool for us to better understand demographic changes and needs in a new way. And we can talk more about that. And also, as you said, it's something that the very subjects that we're studying in demography are actively using and adopting and evolving with. And so the ways that we communicate, the ways that we feel ourselves to be members of a community, the way we identify ourselves in space and time, frankly, are all things that are going to, already we're seeing how we interact with one another is really changing. And I would be shocked if it didn't really have implications for even things like family dynamics that we might think are slower changing. But from the perspective of studying demography, I mean, one of the biggest ways that I think about it, and I'm curious if this is conversations that you're having, is at least in the United States, much of our data about what people are doing, whether they have jobs, where they're moving, what the size of their household, things like that, are all survey based. And increasingly, we have tools to much more accurately and granularly track the movement of people, the size of their families, who they're interacting with. There's some serious ethical challenges around all of this, and I think we all think about whether or not our phones are listening to us and keeping track of things. And so there's a ton of ethical issues that we definitely need to take head on. But I do see a version of the world where we have a much better and more accurate and more rapidly updated pulse of where people are, what they're doing, who's moving where, the challenges that people are facing, health concerns of different demographic groups, that I think if we can do it, if we can do it in a thoughtful way that respects privacy, it could really revolutionize how we keep track of where we all are on this planet.
I like the word pulse that you use since we're called Pulso Demográfico here.
True. I didn't even drop it on purpose, but yeah.
Big data gives you the pulse almost immediately. So
Right.
that is fascinating and something that's really positive. But we also know that data can be manipulated, and we're seeing it often misused to manipulate public perception. And with the rise of AI, I guess, there must be new challenges that we face. And how do you think we can minimize the risks that the data we use to understand demographic changes is real and, not just made up by some algorithm?
Right. I mean, there's sort of two big pieces of the puzzle here. One is making sense of the data that actually is there and coming to a common understanding on that, which pre-AI was no small feat. You can find a statistic to support whatever argument you want to make about this is increasing and this is decreasing. And we hope that we are all using it in good faith, but data can be manipulated. It can be misinterpreted. Even, before computers, we could manipulate data. with AI, you're absolutely right. I mean, you can create synthetic data. You're 3 prompts away from saying, make a spreadsheet that makes it look like X, Y, and Z has changed in a meaningful way. And really an issue that I think about a lot with the presence of AI, and we see it also with misinformation. And this is some research that comes from the NYU Center for Social Media and Politics that I'm just parroting. This is not my research. Is that the role of misinformation and the role of AI in the context of trust is less that, oh, we're going to see something that is generated by AI and think that it's real. There's what they call a second order problem, which is seeing something that's real and dismissing it as generated by AI, or it's misinformation, or it's not real. And so in that world where that is a widespread concern, you're in a position where none of the data is potentially trustworthy because you don't know if it's AI or not. So it sows a kind of chaos and confusion more than just puts wrong information in our head. So all of a sudden we're in a world where you don't know. I mean, we see this even in news outlets. You're reading the news and you get to the bottom and you say, oh, this was written by ChatGPT. You're like, oh, okay. So we're in a moment of a massive learning curve, a point of inflection. My most optimistic view is that in a couple of years, we'll all get much better and we'll have better norms and professional practices around here is how this data was collected, here is who put together this report, and we can actually trace, and we're already doing that, but making that maybe more prominent so we can say, look, this was a manually collected thing, these are surveys, or this is data that was made by this algorithm, but we did it based on all of these things. And so real transparency around methodology is going to be the biggest thing that we can use to make sense of, again, whether it's large end data, like the kinds of data that you're working with in demography, or even smaller data about your local community, or even news headlines and social media algorithms. Is we need a massive transparency around who collected this, where did it come from, do I think the collection methods were sound, and all of those, frankly, boring and analog questions that, again, we were all wrestling with, and I don't think we got totally right pre-AI, where we hear about some scientific study, the headline splashes everywhere, coffee's going to kill you or it's not going to kill you. Right. And no one digs down.
Wine is good for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wine will either save you or kill you.
Save your life.
That's why I drink both coffee and wine at the same time.
Of course, absolutely.
Yeah, just to save this. Yeah, that's some data-driven health advice right there. But really getting into the habit of saying, where did this data come from? And having good documentation practices. And, that's not to say that some synthetic data can't be useful. If we say, hey, this is a simulation based on what I think is going on in the world, and this is, given this, I've now simulated it 10 years ahead, as long as you're transparent about that. I mean, what I'm really worried about are the truly bad actors, and I think it remains to be seen how widespread this is, where you say, I am creating fake data and showing it and making it seem real, right? And pretending that it's real. I think in general, most data at this point can be trusted, but I like to think that we can live in a world where we don't rely on trust, and we can use critical thinking and combing through methodology to actually see for ourselves, like, okay, this is how they did it. This is the evidence for how they did it. And I think a lot of the burden, at least early on, is going to be on the data scientists, the demographers, the people doing the work, to be even more transparent than they already. Maybe what used to be in an appendix is chapter 1, in the sort of work that we're sharing, just to kind of get ahead of this, because it's the doubt that I think is so concerning.
Okay, I think that's a really fundamental point. It's not something that I had thought about before, but absolutely, I think all of us, working with AI, then we need to be very transparent about it. So transparency is a key issue that you're talking about. And in fact, we sort of faced that with this interview with you, Andrea, because we did research on you using AI and found out you were a mom. But it wasn't actually true.
Wasn't I excited to learn that I'm a mother?
Right, exactly. So the trust issue and the transparency is certainly there. Let me turn to something related to a lot of the work that we do in UNFPA, and that's supporting young people in their futures and supporting, I mean, in the context of our demographic future, where more and more people are not having the number of children that they want to have, and that's partially because of the financial burden. A lot of young people are saying that they just can't afford to have kids, actually, for those who do want to have. And one of the issues that comes up a lot is that young people are worried that AI is taking away their jobs. So can you tell us what the data actually says about this? Are these fears really justified?
I think it's the my best answer at this stage is that it's too soon to say for sure. In that, it was roughly spring of 2022 that ChatGPT, at least from what I've observed from the United States, became something of a household name. It was the first semester that I saw my NYU data science students using it in their homework assignments. And, it was just this brand new tool that while it had been around in various GPTs and things, we really didn't see LLMs and generative AI in the mainstream and as a kind of tool that everybody could use until then. So that means it's been not that long, and maybe we are seeing some hiring trends in some sectors. There's a lot of headlines coming out. This tech company is no longer hiring entry-level coders because AI can do it and this sort of thing. But we don't see in the data thus far in the United States, I can't speak for data outside the United States on this front, but in terms of employment data among recent college graduates in the United States, there's that smidge of an increase in lower employment rates, but it's very, very small. And frankly, it's a trend that we're seeing across the labor market in the US. And so I don't know that we've seen this broadly in the economy in the United States. That said, keep in mind that a lot of this data includes a lot of work that's not really affected by AI yet. So teaching, medicine, things like that, like we aren't really seeing those same kinds of trends like we are in some of the more coding intensive and really tech early adopter companies. And there's also plenty of, construction and music teachers and all kinds of things that AI, I find myself sometimes thinking like, should I become a barber? I feel like barbers won't go out of business. We still need, robots aren't cutting our hair yet. So it could be a serious problem. And I think it's good that we're talking about it. I don't see yet that we are quite in a position where we're actively replacing at large scale. It's happening in some cases where we're actively replacing what would be human workers with a handful of AI. Again, it's happening in pockets, but not as a widespread trend. I also think, and would speak with my data science students about this as well, is that with the rise of AI and companies rapidly trying to adopt it, you have a massive arms race for talent that has some tech skills, even if you haven't been formally trained in AI, because you couldn't have, because it wasn't a thing that was taught in colleges and still is barely taught. But you're still seeing a lot of people who, even if we're not really using coding line by line, you still want folks who know Java and Python and all those things so they can interact with Copilot or whatever coding. So I think the tech arms race is still quite high, but the way those roles are going to look is going to change. That said, let's check in a year. The data also is on a massive lag because it's hard to get these numbers. So it could be changing under our feet a bit more than. I guess let me say one other thing, which is that there's generally broader economic conditions that affect the labor force too. So even if we do see a little bit of a change in the employment rate, and again it is relatively small, it's not necessarily an obvious conclusion that it's exclusively due to AI.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I think that's the complexity of the question, really. Okay, so let me go a bit beyond the numbers and look at some of the side effects of all of this, because data is everywhere.
Yes.
So with so much information available, do you think that it's actually making us smarter or just more confused?
I'm so glad that you asked that, because I literally was speaking. I do some data science consulting with companies in different parts of the world. I literally was having a conversation where I was saying, it's not necessarily the case that more information is always better. And I think, and this is in our own lives, right? Like if I'm making a decision, I want to study every possible option that I could choose. I'm picking a cereal off a shelf or figuring out where to go to dinner or other non-food related questions that I might ask. And you think you always need more information, and you can get to a point with data where you're both drowning in information and don't even know where to look and kind of forgot what's interesting, and this went up, do I care? I don't know, right? You get so lost in it, you kind of forest for the trees. And a lot of times I work with companies where they say we both somehow have too much information and not enough at the same time. Kind of the more information I get, the more I want more information so I can make a better decision. And I really do think, and this goes back to what you said at the opening, that I think that we are still the drivers of discovery, of research, of pointing a flashlight on what we think is important to study. And whether we're getting monstrous amounts of data with the help of AI or we're working with a small qualitative study in a rural part of the world, we are the ones who say, okay, set aside all the numbers. What is it that I actually want to understand? Whose lives do I want to improve? how do I know that that's the thing that is worth focusing on to improve? And these are things that these are questions that can be answered in part from data, but can also be answered by talking with people and having subject matter expertise in the region that you're working in and having creativity to say, I've been thinking about these numbers this way. What if I'm actually need to look at it another way? And so I feel very old fashioned when I talk about this, but one of the best ways, even pre-AI, to make sense of just this kind of fire hose of information that's coming at us all the time is to set back, close your computer, close your eyes and say, what is it that I actually care about? Why do I care about that thing? Okay, with that lens, let me focus just there on the data first and answer that. And then you can always step out and you can always ask another question. But I think leading with questions as we approach data and we approach, I could talk about this for a long time, but another small version of this that I interact with in my own life is, you open ChatGPT to ask it a handful of questions. I'm still asking the questions. ChatGPT doesn't yet live in a world where I open my computer and it's just like, hey, here are some things, that you want. So it's sort of like self-driving cars in a way where we still have to sit down and say, this is where I want to go. And I know why I want to go there. It's not the case that we're getting in cars and saying, hello, AI, take me where you think I ought to go. And I think that is true whether we're working with a spreadsheet or a massive LLM.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have to say that that's my personal experience also using generative AI. I mean, for me, I feel it makes me better and smarter.
Yeah.
But I'm directing the questions and I keep asking more. No, I didn't mean that. I want this, and
Right.
to the point where for me, because I don't always have access to so many people, if I'm sitting in one country, then I actually have those conversations sometimes
Yeah.
with AI, right? Asking those questions. And so for me, I find that right now it's making me smarter, not
Yeah.
more confused.
I
However, of course, as you're saying, things evolve very quickly, and we need to make sure we don't get to that point where the car actually tells us where we want to go.
Exactly. And there's a very huge risk, and there's a lot of, how shall I say this, sort of cultural, this is going to sound more loaded than I want it to, but sort of a cultural bias to defer to information or guidance that has been generated by AI or technology. And what I mean by that is, in a lot of my work with companies, they say, hey, we want to use data to understand performance and hire the best people and make the best decisions or marketing campaigns. And there's a tendency to say if an answer comes from an algorithm versus from another person, there's a tendency to prefer the answer from the algorithm.
Mhm.
And I think that's a misguided use. And I think that's where we can become more confused and we can start, algorithms are fantastic, but it's kind of like driving through the rear view mirror because you can only work with the data that you've been given it from the past. And so I really think that the way you're using it and the way I hope that more people are adopting it is it's really more of a thought partner and sort of let me
Exactly.
think about this, let me replace this and sort of treating it like a bicycle as opposed to something that totally replaces how I think. My biggest worry, and again, maybe this is me being old fashioned, is the replacement of, writing letters and writing essays and articles and sort of the critical thinking aspects of working with AI. That's where it concerns me as a replacement. And I have a lot of concerns. I don't teach essays or writing, but I think that the humanities face a serious challenge in that way.
I think so too, because I think it's one thing for me who grew up learning how to do all that,
Right.
and another would be if I grew up with this right now
Yeah.
already at my fingertips. It's
Yeah.
a different story.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, you gave us your biggest fear. What about your biggest hope for
Mm.
the future of data and AI?
My biggest hope, I think, is around this topic of discovery. That I think that it is a way. The very first time I used AI for a coding project, I had been doing my coding, and I know my Stack Overflow and my this and that, and I sort of slog my way through a line, a program or something that I'm using to analyze some data. One of the first times I used AI to help with it, I just felt like it was the first time I ever rode an e-bike where you're just like, oh, I'm pedaling, but I'm going way faster.
Right,
Right? It's
right.
not quite a motorcycle. I'm still pedaling, all of that. But I was just going so much faster. It was so much easier. It became very fun. And so my kind of twofold ways into hopefully more discovery is one, I hope it lowers the bar for a lot of people to work with data and work with data in a hands-on way, particularly people who maybe think they're not math people or don't really enjoy coding that much. I think that you can really do a lot of very sophisticated data analysis with the help of AI, as long as, again, you are in the driver's seat and you're saying, this is what I'm trying to understand. This is how I'll know that I'm right. These are the other explanations that could be all those kind of old-fashioned thinking that we were talking about before. But then the other piece of it is exactly as you were saying, it's a thought partner. It's a way to accelerate and synthesize. We always need to check it. As we've seen, the synthesis won't always be right. But, just yesterday, I sifted through a ton of data on basically immunology and in pediatrics. And this is just not an area I know much about. And it was a great starting point. I then said, okay, I'm going to go read the papers and I'm going to see how they fit and I'm going to talk to the authors. But it really is an accelerant on synthesizing information, on working through information. And as long as and I think we're all doing this in real time, figuring out what it looks like to use this responsibly, because it's like dropping down cars and no one's ever driven and saying, go ahead, like it's messy for a while until it's still pretty messy. But there's a version of the world where if we really get this right, we could be seeing just a ton more learning and discovery and innovation and adaptability than we've ever seen before, because it's really it could be the human brain on steroids in a healthy way. I'm not endorsing steroids.
Right. No, I have to say I fully agree with you. For me, it's absolutely exciting. And when you use it as a thought partner, you can those thoughts can just go at a pace that you've never seen before. So that is really exciting. So I'm happy to leave, to end this interview on that very positive thought. But, Andrea, thank you so much, because the work you do is amazing. And I really want everyone to go to your podcast, Behind the Data. Your passion about these issues really comes through. And I know that you're doing things that are really, changing the world. And I've seen you in action. So thank you so much for agreeing to talk to us today. And we look forward to continuing this conversation. Let's come back in a year and see where we are.
Yes. See if all of my predictions turned out to be completely incorrect, which is...
No, they will be absolutely correct, I'm sure. I'm sure.
I hope so. And no, this was a pleasure. And I love that you're doing this work. And we'll have to talk about demographic data on Behind the Data.
Right, exactly. No, because I think everything that you're talking about, this is really the first episode that we've done on data and linking it to demography. And I think what you're talking about, finding those creative solutions. How can AI help us actually address what the world is going through now, which is this massive demographic change? And so many people are concerned about it. You see it in the media headlines all the time. So how can data and AI actually help us navigate this huge change that we're going through? I think it's going to be really interesting.
I think so too. And one of the ways that it was framed to me a couple of days ago that was very helpful is, it's not written in stone. It's not a given that AI is bad or that AI is good. It's up to us, not to sound like an inspirational quote on a wall, but it's up to us what we make of it, right? And you can put that on a wall or a throw pillow if you'd like.
I will do that now. I'll be embroidering that here.
And look forward to seeing it behind you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you.
Wonderful to see you.
You too.